Okay, so for those of you who don't know me, um, I'm a monk. My name is Karma Tsultrim Namdak. I've been in Dharma since February of 1967. I was a monk in Thailand for 2 years in the 60s. And I also, during that time, met His Holiness the 16th Karmapa, who became my teacher. I was with Namgyal Rinpoche, Situ Rinpoche, Mingyur Rinpoche, Dranga Rinpoche, Ayeng Rinpoche, and many other teachers over the years. And I have practiced really a lot. I received permission to teach from Situ Rinpoche in 1999, and permission to give empowerments and all of that sort of stuff in the early 2000s. So over those years, I accidentally picked up a little bit of information about Buddhism. And I've noticed that many Western Dharma practitioners very often don't know much or enough about Buddhism in general. In some Zen traditions in both Japan and Korea, they don't teach the monks and nuns anything about Buddhism or the life of the Buddha or those things. And I think it's important to have some grasp on the basics. So today we're going to start with the life of the Buddha. And once again, I'm in very poor health, so I'm not able to um, necessarily get all. I'm going to do this mostly from memory. So this is not the talks to get all the dates exactly right or some of the names exactly right. We're going to talk about how how this information relates to our spiritual search today. If you want to get the names and dates and all of those details that I might not supply you, there are lots of books that talk about these things, and you can get it there. So the first topic, which is today, is the life of the Buddha. And the life of the Buddha is in itself a very great teaching, and possibly the most important teaching that the Buddha gave. The Buddha was born approximately 2,600 years ago in northern India or Nepal. His actual birthplace is said to be in Lumbini. But for point of fact, over 2,000 years, nobody knew where Lumbini was. And I think it was two Englishmen decided to try find it. And they made some calculations. And then they dug up some ground and they found a tree that had been buried over time. And they decided it was under that tree that the Buddha was born. How accurate that information is, I don't know. But he was born somewhere, uh, possibly in the southern part of Nepal. His mother was the wife of the leader of the Shakya clan. She might have had the title queen, he might have had the title king. Nobody seems really sure. But in any case, the Buddha was born. As I recall, his mother died in childbirth, and so her sister became effectively his mother and raised him. Now, when the Buddha was born, his father called together some great sages. Um, I was told they were astrologers, but I've also seen them designated in other ways. And the king wanted to know the future of this new baby. And so the astrologers or sages did their thing. And uh, I was told in the beginning there were seven. I've also heard eight, but let's say seven. And six of them said that he will either be a great world king or he will become a Buddha. And the seventh one, Kondanya, who was the youngest of them all, said unconditionally he will become a Buddha. And to the king, that was very bad news. He wanted his son to not pursue Buddhahood, but stay at home and take over the kingdom and be the ruler once the king himself died. So he decided to raise the boy in a very sheltered manner. Uh, the boy who would become the Buddha was raised in the palace, not really allowed to go out much, and he was shielded from all sorts of suffering. He was educated. He was trained in all of the things that princes were trained in, and eventually he married and had a son. Around that time, he made some excursions from the palace out into the regular civilization of that little kingdom, and he had a charioteer or attendant, sometimes called Chana or Chanaka. Um, by the way, the Dalai Lama recently said that he was in fact Chana in that previous life. And so this young prince, who was now in his 20s, made some excursions out into the world, accompanied by Chana. And on one of these excursions, he saw an extremely old person. He'd never seen anything like that before. And he asked Chana, "What is that?" Chana said, "It's an old person." And the Buddha said, "Will that happen to me?" And Jhana said, "Unless you die, it will happen to you." On another excursion, they were out and they saw somebody very sick. And the Buddha asked Jhana what that was, and Jhana told him. And the Buddha said, "Will that happen to me?" And Jhana said, "Well, we don't know. It's possible. Everyone is subject to sickness, but when and where they get sick or if they get sick, we don't generally know ahead of time." And on another outing, he saw a corpse. And it was not uncommon for poor people who died to just, their body to just be by the side of the road. And he saw this corpse and he asked Chana what that was. And Chana told him it was a man who had died. And the Buddha said, "Well, that happened to me." And Chana said, "Absolutely, for sure. Everyone dies. There is no escape from death." So the Buddha contemplated each of these deeply. And on yet another occasion, he went out and he saw what was called a bhikkhu. India for about 5 to 10,000 years before the time of the Buddha had a tradition of supporting religious seekers of any tradition. Most villages had a little pavilion just outside of town where the seekers could come and stay. They could sleep there. and they could come into the town or village to beg for food in the daytime. And so the Buddha saw one of these seekers. And so he asked Jhana what that was. Jhana told him. And that seeker was, in fact, the fourth messenger. These four outings, what he saw on these outings are now often called the four messengers. The old person, the sick person, the dead person, and the seeker. And the Buddha contemplated that deeply and decided that it was unworthy to live the life of luxury that he was leading, because you are subject to old age, sickness, and death, and you don't know when any of those things are coming, and you don't know what happens after that. So he decided to leave home and become a bhikkhu, a seeker. And so one night, accompanied by Jhana, they left his father's kingdom on horse and rode away. And at one point, the Buddha dismissed Jhana and the horses, and he went on foot. And it's said that he went into the forest and somehow changed into monk's robes. Uh, and became a seeker. Later on, once the Buddha had taught and his disciples were called bhikkhus or bhikshus in Sanskrit, then that word came to generally just mean Buddhist bhikkhus. But before the time of the Buddha, a bhikkhu was just meant a homeless one who was, for the most part, a spiritual seeker. So once the Buddha left home and became a bhikkhu, then he had to decide what to do. And he had heard of two famous Indian teachers. I think one was named Lama, I forget the name of the other one. And he decided to go to one of those and request teaching, which he did. Now, the one he went to first was someone who had mastered the first seven jhanas. And in the seventh jhana, it's basically the void, emptiness, could also be called nothingness. And the Buddha meditated and quickly mastered that jhana. His teacher thought that that was enlightenment. But when the Buddha reached that stage and contemplated it deeply, he realized that you're still subject to old age, sickness, and death. You haven't really accomplished anything. And so he despite an offer to stay and become the teacher, he left. After he left, he went to the other teacher that he had heard about. And that teacher had also mastered the seventh jhana, but he had received teaching on how to attain the eighth and final jhana, but he had not done so. But he gave those teachings to the Buddha. The Buddha meditated and mastered the eighth jhana, which is sometimes called the level of neither perception nor non-perception. It's also described as absolutely exactly like the enlightened state, except that it's not permanent. And so he mastered this teaching. Then that teacher requested the Buddha to stay and become his teacher and everybody else's teacher. But the Buddha once again contemplated and decided this was not enlightenment. So he left. Somewhere along the way, either before or after going to those teachers, uh, Courtenay, one of the astrologers who had been called to see him when he was born, and who had predicted that Shakyamuni would indeed become a Buddha. Kondanya and four sons of the other astrologers had gone out looking for him, and they found him and became his attendants. Now, at that time in India, there were many uh, ideas about how to make spiritual progress, how to attain enlightenment. And the common belief was, and actually the way teachers were judged was by their asceticism. So the Buddha decided to purify the mind by the path of asceticism, starving the body, and so on. And so he did that. And he got down to where he was eating 1 grain of rice and 1 grain of something else a day, and that's all. His body became very thin. In some Buddhist monasteries in Asia, you will see statues of the Buddha as an ascetic, where you can count all his ribs because he's so thin. Uh, so the Buddha did this for 6 years. And in the end, he concluded that this was not the path to awakening, that the ascetic path eventually weakened the body, which in turn then weakened the mind and did not lead anywhere. So he decided to give that up. Around that time, he was living in what is now called Bodh Gaya, and he decided to accept food. And the story is that there was a holy tree that was venerated by some of the people in the area. And a young woman came out one day to offer food to this tree. I believe her name was Sujata. I could be wrong. And so when she saw the Buddha, she instead gave him this food, which was a bowl of milk rice. And the Buddha ate that. And at that point, his 5 attendants, who had been with him for 6 years, called him a glutton and left. So, if you eat a handful of food, apparently that's the definition of a glutton, so they left. So the Buddha was on his own. So he decided to seek a sign about whether the time was ripe for awakening. And he had a little begging bowl, and he went to the river, and he said, if this is the time for me to awaken, when I put this bowl in the river, let it float upstream. And if not, let it flow downstream. So he put the bowl in the river, it flowed upstream, confirming the sign that this was the time for his enlightenment. So he decided to prepare for that. So he put his house in order. He took a bath, and got everything proper in his life. And he went to the what's now called the Bodhi tree. I think it's generically called a pipal tree, whatever that is, but he went to the Bodhi tree, and he took some kusha grass and made a seat. under the Bodhi tree. If you've ever had an empowerment and the Lama sprinkles you with blessed water, the whisk that he's using is made out of kusha grass, the very same kusha grass from India, but not the same ones that the Buddha sat on, but a newer version. So the Buddha made this seat and he sat down. Then there's a story or myth that Mara came along, Mara, the embodiment of evil, and said, you can't sit there, that belongs to me. And the Buddha said, no, it belongs to me. And Mara said, who will you call as your witness to confirm that that seed indeed belongs to you? And at that point, the earth itself said, I will confirm it. Which is why when you see the Buddha statue, his right hand is draped over his left knee, touching the earth. That's symbolic of that relationship when the earth witnessed his right to sit under the Bodhi tree. There may have been some sort of temptation, I don't remember. But anyhow, Mara departed and the Buddha was left sitting under the Bodhi tree. And he took a resolution that I will not get up from this seat until full awakening. And it was sunset, and he sat down on his kusha grass seat and started to contemplate. Now, when I first met Namjo Rinpoche in the 1960s, we would go up to Kinmount, to the Dharma Center there, and we would do work on the weekends. And Namjo would come around and visit and see what everybody's doing. And whenever he came to me, if there was nobody else around, he would tell me something. And what he told me was what the Buddha did on that night of his enlightenment for those 12 hours. He sat down at sunset and awoke at dawn. And Namjo Rinpoche told me that story probably 20 times at least. And every time he finished the story, he'd say, this is an important clue. So listen carefully. According to Namjo Rinpoche, the Buddha sat down and he remembered that as a child, he had spontaneously gone into jhana sitting under a tree. So he decided to go into jhana, the first 4 jhanas, and using the power of that very focused mind during the first watch of the night, he did a particular meditation. Now, in those days, they didn't keep track of time by hours. They kept track of it by watches. A watch was about 4 hours long, and there were 3 watches of the night, the first, the watch, the middle watch, and the last watch. And there were 3 watches in the daytime, 4 hours each, 24 hours in a day. So for the first watch of the night, when the Buddha sat under the tree, he did the meditation, which is taught in the Visuddhimagga, about remembering your past lives. And he remembered many, 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 many past lives. Namjo Rinpoche told me once, or told me many times actually, how you remember an entire past life in a second or so. But I can't remember the explanation, but he told me that. And so during the night, the Buddha reviewed countless past lives. where he was born, what his name was, who his parents were, what he did in that life, how he passed away, what happened next. And so at the end of the first watch of the night, having reviewed countless past lives, certain wisdom arose in the Buddha. He understood an awful lot about karma and an awful lot about all the causes and conditions of uh, how you're born, where you're born, what happens to you. And so he uh, acquired quite a bit of wisdom from remembering all those past lives and watching all of that unfold. In the middle watch of the night, he did a meditation which is called the arising and passing away of beings. And the arising and passing away of beings, you expand your mind to include all beings, and you watch them die and be reborn. And so he did that for the middle watch of the night. At the end of the middle watch of the night, great wisdom arose in him. He fully understood karma. He fully understood cause and effect. He fully understood wandering in samsara and all of that. In the third watch of the night, he then switched and examined his own mind to locate each and every remaining clinging that he had and obliterating them. So during the third watch of the night, he examined his own mind using that great power of focus that you have in the fourth jhana. He found every little bit of remaining clinging that existed in him, and he obliterated it. At the end of the third watch of the night, having accumulated great wisdom and obliterated all remaining clinging, he was ready for enlightenment, but it didn't happen. So he decided to open his eyes, and he opened his eyes and he saw the morning star, and that was the trigger for the awakening to happen. He then attained full Buddhahood. He then, for the first time in his life, could see reality as it really was. And he spent 7 periods of 7 days examining all aspects of reality in great detail. Namgyal Rinpoche told me the first week he focused on dependent origination and worked that out, and then on various other things for the rest of the 7 weeks. At the end of the 7 weeks, his wisdom was complete. He thoroughly understood absolutely everything about reality and life, and he was there in the forest. And the story is that the head of the Brahmas, the head of the Devas, the head of the Devas came down from the Deva heaven and approached him and said, now that you have attained this, please teach beings. And the Buddha said, no, I'm not going to teach. Beings have too much dust in their eyes. The Dharma to which I have attained is very deep and very subtle and would be impossible for them to understand. Whereupon the head Deva said what I consider one of the greatest sentences in the history of the universe. He said to the Buddha, some of them have less dust than others. And the Buddha said, okay, I'll teach. So then, using his uh, various divine eyes, the Buddha looked around, and his first thought was to teach the two yogis who had taught him the various jhanas and so on. And he looked and found that they had both died and gone to Dewa realms. He then looked around and he found his 5 attendants were still alive, and they were at Sarnath at the deer park, and he decided he would teach them. So he set off for Sarnath, walking from Bodh Gaya. Now I've driven from Sarnath to Bodh Gaya, and my recollection is it took many hours, maybe as much as 6 or 8 hours, I forget. So it's quite a distance. It's not like you can just, walk for a few hours and you're there. It's many, many, many days. And he would walk through trails in the forest. And one day he was walking towards Sarnath, and there was somebody on the path walking the other way. And this was the first human who ever saw him uh, as the Buddha. And this human was very struck by the Buddha's appearance. And he said, oh my, you look so clear. Uh, uh, what has happened to you? And the Buddha explained that that he had attained Buddhahood, and this man, who was a disciple of another teacher, was very, very impressed by him, and he said, "It may be so. It may be so." So, being curious, I looked around for years to try to find out what happened to the first human who saw the Buddha after enlightenment. And I finally found the story. And the story was that he kept going and went to see his teacher, but eventually decided to leave there. And he went and saw the Buddha and became ordained. And he meditated for a while, not much happened. So he gave up being a monk, and he went and got married and had some children and worked. And then later in life, he decided to give that up and go be a monk again. And by the time of his death, he had attained the first or second level of enlightenment. So it was sort of strange that the very first human to see the Buddha did not attain full enlightenment in that lifetime, but he attained quite a bit, and it took a while. Uh, so I must be related to him, like we're in the slow learner clan somehow. It takes a long time. Uh, but anyhow, that's what happened to him. So the Buddha carried on, and eventually he came to Sarnath, the deer park, and the 5 uh, men who had been his attendants for 6 years were sitting there. And when they saw him coming, they said amongst themselves, "Oh, here comes Gautama. Uh, let's not prepare a seat for him." Uh, and they made other plans to basically not be too nice. But when the Buddha got up close, they couldn't help themselves. They prepared a seat for him, and he sat down. And he announced to them that he had, in fact, attained full enlightenment. Uh, at first, they didn't believe him. And then he said, "Well, you've known me a long time. Have you ever known me to say what is not true?" and various conversations like that. And they eventually then decided to listen to him, at which point he taught the first sermon, which will be our next topic. The Four Noble Truths, the Eightfold Path, that sort of thing. What happened to the Buddha after teaching those five yogis? They attained full enlightenment in a short time. And two or three other teachers who each had quite a few disciples came to the Buddha for teaching. He taught them, they and their disciples attained full enlightenment. And in a relatively short time, about 1,200 people had attained full enlightenment. And so he was well established as a teacher at that point. He taught for 45 years. He also left this planet to teach in other realms at times. For example, the Abhidhamma, the Abhidharma, was a teaching that he gave in another realm. And when he returned to earth, Sariputra asked him where he'd been and what he had done. And the Buddha told him he had given a teaching in this other realm. And Sariputra said, could you give that teaching to me? And the Buddha said, well, he couldn't because it was in a very strange binary language. And so Sariputra said, well, can you give me the gist of it? And that the gist of it, the teaching the Buddha gave him, is what became known as the Abhidharma. The Buddha, after a while, it was decided by his followers that he should have an attendant. And so Sariputra volunteered, Moggallana volunteered, and all of his key disciples volunteered. In fact, everybody around him volunteered to be his attendant, and he turned them all down. And the only one who didn't volunteer was his cousin named Ananda. And finally, somebody said, what about you, Ananda? And Ananda said, well, I would do it, but there are conditions. Ananda didn't want to be treated as a special being and various things like that. So the Buddha accepted his conditions, and Ananda became his attendant. And Ananda was not very much motivated to actually attain enlightenment for himself, but he was blessed with a perfect memory. And that came in very handy after the Buddha died, when they wanted to collect what the Buddha had taught. Now, the Buddha was, let me use the word, scheduled to live to be 100 in that lifetime. And when he was 80, he had a very painful condition of some sort. He was able to manage that by his Buddha powers, but he felt like he had accomplished everything he wanted to accomplish. And he told Ananda that he was going to shake off the last 20 years of his life. And he told Ananda that again, and he told Ananda that again. And so finally he shook off the last 20 years of his life. And what do you think he did after that? He criticized Ananda for not talking him out of it. That's one piece of Dharma history that I will never understand. So then he died in what's now called Kushinagar in northern India. Some of you will be there next month. Wonderful. Um, and the Dharma continued to spread. We'll talk about that another time. So any questions on the life of the Buddha or the meaning of the life of the Buddha?
Hi, Lama Sidney. Can you hear me?
Hi.
Hi. Sorry, I'm not in a very quiet place, so
I can,
um okay, good. I have a question. Um so according to both Mahayana and Vajrayana, bodhicitta, which is well, through my understanding, the willingness to help all sentient beings is the core of the ultimate Buddhahood. Then
yeah.
why initially Buddha didn't want to teach sentient beings after attaining the Buddhahood?
The reason he gave was that uh, what he attained was too deep and too subtle for most beings to understand. And it cannot be said that he lacked compassion or lacked bodhicitta. It was just a practical decision. But once the Dewa pointed out that some beings don't have too much dust in their eyes and they could be taught, they could understand, then he immediately agreed to teach.
I see. So he wanted to teach, but initially he thought it's not very practical, so he gave up.
How the story goes. Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much. Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
There's a question from Ali. She had to leave the meeting, but she left a written question.
Okay.
Which has three parts to it. First, does one need to go through the jhanas in order to attain enlightenment? If yes, what is the value of everything else on the path? And if no, what is the value of learning the jhanas?
The jhanas are part of samsara. Uh, that should be understood plain and simple. Uh, One of the Buddha's cousins, Devadatta, mastered the jhanas and tried to actually assassinate the Buddha, and had a bad outcome from that. In the original teaching of the Buddha, the jhanas were very much part of what he taught because you can use the power of mind that you attain through the jhanas to develop insight and ultimately awakening. They're not very much in favor these days, um, or in fashion, I should say, in some forms of Buddhism. Um, I did come across a Tibetan text that discussed the jhanas, so it does appear to be part of Tibetan Buddhism. Um, what what you can say is that you absolutely for sure do not need the jhanas to attain the first 3 stages of awakening. The first 3 stages of enlightenment. Whether you need the jhanas for higher levels, well, let's wait and find out. I don't want to speculate on that. Was there more to that question, or did that answer?
Well, it was just if I think you've covered it. If the jhanas aren't necessary, was the second part. Why are they taught?
Why are they taught? Well, because they make it so much easier, you know. What the Buddha did on the night of enlightenment, he could not have done without the jhanas. Um, if you try to awaken without the jhanas, then you rely on mindfulness, and so every once in a while you have an insight, and enough insights, and you have the first stage of awakening, but it's relatively slow. When the people in the early days after the Buddha mastered the jhanas, they could use that focus to develop insight quickly and therefore develop awakening quickly. When I was a monk in Thailand, there was a saying, uh, uh, meditating without the jhanas is like surgery without anesthetic. Meditating with the jhanas is like surgery with anesthetic. It's painless. Um, uh, some of my friends who attained jhanas, their experience of meditation was you sit down, you go into the jhana, bliss arises, uh, all of your bodily problems don't exist while you're in the state of jhana. All of your kilesas or negativities are suppressed completely in the jhana. And it's really, 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 really pleasant. My experience of meditation and when I was in Thailand was I sat down. Within a few minutes, my knees hurt. Within a few more minutes, my back hurt. Within a few minutes, my mind couldn't focus anymore. It was tired, and then it was 45 more minutes of agony till the hour was up, and then I would do it again. You know, it was surgery without an anesthetic. It was painful. Um, so I did come across somebody who taught jhanas a few years ago, um, and I don't know why he taught jhanas. Um, I think what one should do is, well, then the other thing that should be said is that when you're living in the world and you're working, and maybe you have family, and you have to pay taxes, and you have to renew your driver's license and all of those things, it's very, 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 very difficult to attain jhana under those circumstances. I remember I had a discussion with Namdak Rinpoche one time, and I asked him how long it would take to attain the jhanas, and he said, if you go into retreat, a minimum of 3 months. In retreat, you set aside all your worldly involvements, all your worldly cares. And so then you can focus more and more and more and more. And to attain jhana, you have to have absolutely perfect focus for a little while before you go into the jhana in order to get that perfect focus in the jhana. So my experience was that that's very difficult to do. If you read the Visuddhimagga, it gives you tips on how to attain the jhanas, but the very first tip surprises everybody. The very first tip in the Visuddhimagga on how to attain the jhanas is get your house in order first. And what that meant for a monk in the old days was uh, look at your begging bowl, which was made of clay, and if there are any cracks or defects in it, then refire it, like you do, when you make something out of clay, you fire it in a kiln or whatever. So the first thing was to correct any defects in your begging bowl. Then, if you were staying in a little hut or something, if there was a hole in the wall, patch it. And then sweep your hut out. And then take a bath and put on clean robes. And then sit down. That's the first step in attaining the jhana. Living in the world, in the West, um, you can sort of get things, get your so-called house relatively in order, but you can't get rid of the fact that you have to remember to do this tomorrow, or you have to remember, or you have this coming up, or all these various commitments that we have and things we have to do. So it's very, very difficult while living in the world in the West to get your house in order enough to attain the jhana. It can be done. It can be done, but it's difficult. Can I tell a story? Yeah.
Yeah.
So at one point, I was trying to develop the first jhana. This is many years ago. And I was living in the world and I was working and I was married and had a child. And, but every day after lunch, I would sit down and try to develop the first jhana in a recliner because of all my arthritis. But I would have the recliner upright, so I had pretty good posture considering. And in the text, uh, is the translation of the Pali from the Visuddhimagga for getting your house in order is sever the lesser impediments. And so I had lunch and I didn't have much. And I had a plate and a fork that were dirty. And so I thought, well, it's not really worth getting dishwater going and so on just for that little bit. I'll leave the plate in the sink until supper time and then I'll run the dishwasher. So I sat down and I was trying to develop the first jhana when all of a sudden a very loud voice in my head said, sever the lesser impediments. And I knew exactly what that meant at that time. So I got up and I went and I washed that dish and that fork and dried them and put them away. I swept my room. I took a shower. I put on clean clothes. And I went and sat down in the recliner. And I instantly went into the first jhana. So remember, sever the lesser impediments. What that means is put your house in order, put your body, put your mind in order. Don't leave things undone that need to be done before you meditate. Um, so my recommendation for people living in the West, in the world, in this day and age, is practice mindfulness until you attain one or more of the stages of enlightenment, and then reevaluate. And don't bother with the jhanas until that time. I hope that's precise enough.
That's very good. Thank you. Paulina has a question.
Okay.
Hi. Hi, Lama Sidney. Can you hear me? I couldn't get my video work. But my question is, you are saying that when Buddhas using earth as the witness, so earth witness for him for what? For the previous lifetimes, or can he be witness for all the seekers? Can the earth be the witness?
Sorry, I'm not getting all of what you said, but the earth witness was the Buddha has done enough in the past to be entitled to sit in that seat under the Bodhi tree. And that Mara had no claim to that seat.
Okay, so for all the meditators, do we win the right to practice? Do we win the right to reach enlightenment like Buddha did? Or do we have to purify ourselves enough to be able to be in the seat for enlightenment?
You don't need to do that part. You don't need the earth to be your witness. It's said in the Bhadrakalpika Sutra that all the Buddhas of this eon get enlightened in the same place under that Bodhi tree, or it's actually not under the Bodhi tree. It's called the Vajra throne, and but for the rest of us, we can do it anywhere. We don't need the earth to be our witness. So that part about the earth being the witness is just specific to Shakyamuni Buddha, not to us.
Okay. Thanks, Lama Sidney. My second question is, we are doing the sadhana and stuff. What is the purpose of doing the sadhana practice?
So there are many ways to make spiritual progress. Namgyal Rinpoche used to describe 7 categories of activity that lead to spiritual progress. One was the practice of mindfulness. One was using sound. One was using body movement. And I don't remember the rest of them. I'm not very good with lists. So in mantra practice, sadhana practice, the sound is very, very, very important to take us along the path. So when I was young, Namgyal Rinpoche used to frequently tell me when we were alone, it's not enough for you to practice. You need to know that the practice is working, and you need to know how it's working. So for my practice life, I was always asking those questions. Is the practice working? And if so, how is it working? So when I took up sadhana practice, I asked that question. And one day I had a vision. And the vision was that the visualization contains archetypal elements such as color, posture, implements, so on, and that these speak directly to the deepest part of our mind. Namjo used to use the expression the depth mind. And the depth mind does not function in words, it functions in archetypes. Archetypes, I believe, were discovered in the West by the psychiatrist Carl Jung, but they were known in the East for millennia. So when at that time I was doing Chenrezig practice and I would visualize Chenrezig above my head, well, the fact that he's above my head, he's higher than me. The fact that he's white indicates purity. The fact that he's sitting in a full lotus position indicates that his attainment comes from meditation. The fact that he has 4 arms indicates he's willing to help, and so on and so on and so on. So the visualization speaks directly to the core of your being. Now, in Theravada Buddhism, the Buddha used to use the analogy of an onion, so that you would have an onion and you would peel one layer away, throw it away, and then you would peel another layer away, throw it away, and you keep doing that, and eventually you'd peel the last layer away, and nothing is left, and that's enlightenment. So that's working from the outside in. Now, with the sadhana practice, the visualization takes you right to the core of your being right away, and then the mantra churns everything up there. So it's attaining spiritual progress from the inside out, just the opposite of the practice of Theravada type meditation. That was the vision. That was the vision I had. I have done tons and tons and tons of mantra practice, of sadhana practice, and I will tell you from personal experience, it works. And from that vision, I believe I have some idea how it works. Also, an important part of sadhana practice is at the end, you dissolve everything into emptiness and sit in that emptiness for a while. Now, Trungpa Rinpoche described what happens to meditators in daily life. He described it as that sometimes you start moving toward the luminosity. The luminosity is a very, 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 very high level of consciousness. And when you move toward the luminosity spontaneously, symptomatically, you notice that your sense of self starts to dissolve, and boundaries disappear, and everything becomes undefined. And when that happens, we become uncomfortable. And so we do something to get back to our comfort zone where everything is defined. We know what everything is. Unfortunately, our comfort zone is also where all the suffering is. And to go beyond suffering, we have to get comfortable being in that unknown. That's where suffering is undone. So when you do a sadhana practice and at the end you dissolve everything into emptiness and you get used to sitting in that emptiness, then when you spontaneously move toward the luminosity, there is a chance that you won't have fear because you have practiced being in that state. So the resting in emptiness part of a sadhana practice is at least as important as the recitation of the mantra. And fear is the big problem moving into the unknown. We simply are not comfortable being somewhere where there are no borders, there's no self, everything is undefined. We're just normally not comfortable there. So practice sitting in the emptiness. The Dalai Lama a few years ago said, the biggest mistake Vajrayana practitioners make is that they don't spend enough time in that state, in the state of emptiness. He said, however much time you spend saying the mantra, you should spend that same amount of time resting in the emptiness. Now, nobody does that, but I would suggest that if you're resting in the emptiness is for 60 seconds, well, increase it to 3 minutes to start. And maybe later be wild and crazy and go to 5 minutes, but start to spend more time in the emptiness. And we all get very fixed on counting the mantras because we know we're supposed to do a certain number. And so that seems like the important part, but it isn't the only important part. The sitting in the emptiness is also a very important part. So I know there's still some questions possible, but we've gone over an hour. We should probably stop for now. What do you think, Brian?
Oh, sorry. Yes, I think it's good to keep it to an hour, and we can do these sessions for weeks and months if we need to.
Okay.
Thank you.
So so I would recommend that you contemplate the Buddha's life about how he had the absolute very best life as a young man, and he found it to be not enough. That's a very worthwhile contemplation. Why is it not enough? Okay, let's dedicate any merit up to now and from all sources and times to all beings that each without exception attain the ultimate for themselves. Well, thank you all for coming. We'll see you in a few weeks. Wish me well for my surgery next week. I don't think they're removing my whole head, but maybe the ugly bits. I don't know. We'll see. Take care then.